My name is Scott Ambler. I'm one of the people behind the Discipline Agile framework along with Mark Lyons. And I've been doing this Agile, as most of you probably know me, I've been doing this Agile stuff for a long time. I was the thought leader behind the Agile modeling method in the early 2000s and the Agile data method. So I tend to take on some of the less sexy topics, I guess you would say, but absolutely critical ones to your success. So, because I'm a firm believer in empiricism and in observing what works and observing what needs to be done and dealing with the real issues, regardless of whether or not those issues are fun and exciting. They need to be dealt with. So I think we'll see some of that. So in today's talk. So today's talk is an overview of the new book, An Executive Guide to Discipline Agile. And what I want to do is talk about what Agile looks like from an enterprise class setting. So what if you're working for a large bank or an insurance company or a retail organization or an established organization that sometimes has been around for decades and sometimes even centuries. We're currently working with an organization that's been in play for over 350 years now. So a little bit of legacy going on there. A little bit of legacy culture, legacy systems, legacy ways of working. And how do you overcome that? How do you help those organizations which are in flight? And sometimes there are thousands and tens and even hundreds of thousands of people who are working together doing whatever it is that they're doing. And how do you help them improve when there's all this stuff, all this overhead, all this baggage of and some of it's, baggage is probably the wrong word, but all this stuff that's going on, much of which is important. It might not be what we like and it might not be the most interesting thing to us, but it is important, it is critical. And how do we evolve that in a way that help those people to evolve and more than just the software developers. So I'm gonna cover a lot of ground today. So to get a feel for the amount of ground that I will cover, I'm going to start off with a metaphor. A metaphor we've been using for a couple of years now. But I'm going to get into the framework itself. I'm going to start off with Discipline Agile delivery. How do we do software development from beginning to end, and more importantly, solution delivery, not just software development. Then I'll get into DevOps and what DevOps actually looks like in the banks of the world, in these enterprises of the world, not just these startup companies where where you're not dealing with all this legacy stuff and you might not be dealing with as much regulatory stuff and good things like that. And then we'll get into what does IT look like, and then finally, what does an agile enterprise look like? What is business agility all about? And then we'll end up there. So the metaphor. So what story am I about to tell? So I think the Agile community, we've been around for close to 20 years now. I guess this is year 16, almost year 17, and we've gotten very good at building a racing car engine. So we've gotten very good at building software development teams, and we really are at the leading edge in many cases of modern software development. We're doing this continuous integration, continuous delivery stuff, high quality, high impact, releasing many times a day in some cases. We really have sort of figured out how to do this software development stuff, and we're pretty darn good at it, I think. But then we take these awesome software development teams, these racing car engines, and we dump them into our organizational tractor, and it's a big surprise where we're not winning the race. So we've got these great software development teams, and they're doing whatever flavor of Agile you like, and then they're surrounded by the procurement people and the finance people and the audit people and the data folks and all these other groups that really aren't that agile. They have their own bodies of knowledge, they've got their own religions, they've got their own belief systems, and we're really not seeing the benefit in many cases. Yeah, we might have tweaked software development, maybe we're producing a little bit better software and stuff like that, but the rest of the organization, or some parts of the organization are holding us back. We're really not seeing the vision. I think this is a phenomenally common problem in many organizations worldwide now, where they focused on the easy things, and they've dealt with some of the easy things, the software development stuff, and now they're looking at the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is butt ugly. How do we deal with that? So, because it's not really about racing car engines, it's about racing cars. If you want to win a race, you need a racing car, right? I think inherently we know this, but we also know it's not about a racing car. Anybody can go and buy a racing car. A couple months ago, my wife and I bought a new car, And we're in at the dealership, and if you go into a modern car dealership, they've got the cars that you can actually afford, but they've always got one or two racing cars in the front, right? So the guys are always looking at the racing car. Oh man, I wish I could buy this instead of the minivan. But there's this really cool racing car for $250,000, and then there's the other vehicles that you actually might have a shot at buying. But anyway, so the point is that any idiot can go and buy a racing car. Right? You whip out your Amex and suddenly you're driving away with a racing car. But you don't really know how to, I don't think anybody a racing car driver here? No, okay, we're not racing car drivers. So yes, we can buy a racing car, but we still don't know how to run a race. Because in order to run a race, not only do we need a racing car, but we need a racing car driver, and we need a pit crews. We need these guys that can come out and take the tires off and put new tires on in 3.7 seconds and fill up the gas in 2 seconds and all that sort of stuff. And if you don't have that, you're not going to win the race. But even if I've got a racing car and a pit crew and a great driver, still can't win the race because I need a race. I need somebody that's running, that has this business, this racing business that allows me to take my racing car and make money, selling advertising or however it is that racing car teams make money. Right? So I need the full kit and caboodle. So it's not just about the engine. It's not just about this stuff you learned on your 2-day certification course. We need to look at the bigger picture. Okay? And the bigger picture is complex. I don't know anything about Formula One racing, but the little that I do know about Formula One, I know it's a very complex business. We inherently know this. And all the businesses that you work for have some inherent complexities. It's not this simple, simplistic vision that we often hear from the Agilists. So we need to look at the bigger picture. So what's the metaphor? So first of all, yes, it's great to have these great racing car engines. So this is what Disciplined Agile delivery is all about. How do we do agile solution delivery from beginning to end, and all aspects of it, not just the cute little meetings that our daily stand-up meeting and our weekly or bi-weekly planning sessions and demos and stuff like that. Not just the meetings, but how does everything fit together? How do we address architecture in an agile manner? How does testing truly fit in? How does programming fit in? How does governance fit in? How do we govern these agile teams? These are interesting questions that need to be answered. And I realize that governance is a swear word. I'm going to use that swear word many, many times. But the fact is, you are being governed, and you deserve to be governed well. I don't think that's a unreasonable expectation. So how does this governance stuff fit in? And very few people get excited by governance, but the fact is you are being governed, so let's figure it out. Let's address this full picture. And let's streamline the entire thing. A lot of the issues, so in the first Disciplined Agile Delivery book, which came out in 2012, the gentleman who wrote the foreword, David West, who is now the chief product owner at scrum.org, but at the time he was an analyst for Forrester, and he coined the term water scrumfall. And in his study of the industry, he went into all these organizations that were claiming to be doing Scrum, and they were looking at all these supposed Scrum Agile teams, and what they found out was the vast majority of them were doing what's called water scrumfall, where they do heavy upfront analysis and design and architecture stuff and planning stuff, because that's what they know how to do. They do this lightweight construction stuff, so that's a good thing. And then they do heavy back-end deployment, transition, whatever you want to call that stuff. And the problem was because nobody was looking at the full picture. Nobody was asking the question, how do we streamline this entire thing from beginning to end? How does it all fit together? How do we streamline? How do we make it as lightweight as possible? And then hopefully go back and do it again successfully. So that's what Disciplined Agile Delivery is all about. And that's a good start. But what we really need is DevOps. This is what this racing car is all about. How do we do DevOps? And it's not just the fun DevOps in the startup companies or in the e-commerce companies in Silicon Valley, but how do we do DevOps in a bank, in an insurance company? How do you do DevOps when you've got a COBOL mainframe? You get this huge COBOL app running on the mainframe. You've got DB2 on the mainframe, you got COBOL running on the mainframe, you got 50 different databases out there, and you're trying to do updates, multiple updates a day. How do you do that? Oh, it's got to be secure. Wouldn't it be nice to be secure? We all know about how all the wonderful things that happen with Equifax and all this sort of stuff. So it's got to be secure. There's a few complexities when you're working in these large established organizations. So it's not just this easy, let's go do continuous delivery and everything will be fine point of view. Wonderful, wonderful vision, but not complete. But getting DevOps up and running, which is enough of a challenge in most organizations, that's a great start. But the entire IT department really needs to be agile. We need to be effective in IT because all it takes is one or two ineffective processes. If you're still doing traditional governance, where you got these quality gates where you produce big documents and somebody's going to sign off on the documents and stuff like that. All it takes is something like that to kill your DevOps effort. Right? And the DevOps guys will fake it out and fool the governance people. There's many ways you can fake out governance, but that's not real governance now, right? I'm definitely not suggesting that, but I think we can all observe that most of these traditional governance efforts are actually being faked out by the people who are supposedly being governed. And whether or not the governance people recognize that, that's a different conversation usually, but certainly most people, I see many teams that, we went through the architect, they've pretty much got the system up and running, and they just finally made it through the architecture gate, right? They just finally cleaned up their architecture documents enough to please the bureaucrats. So that's clearly not governance, right? That's bureaucracy. So anyways, we can improve that, I hope. And then finally, we need an opportunity. So we need an organization that can take this awesome IT department and make money with it. So let's take these racing teams and run races and make lots of money, in this case entertain people and make money entertaining people somehow. How do we leverage these IT teams, these IT groups into value streams in order to make money? So we got to get our act together on the business side of things. Many of you probably work in organizations where maybe you've got some good software development going on, but your procurement people really aren't all that agile. Or your control folks, not all that agile. Or your finance people, still doing annual budgets. You're trying to be agile, and yet your finance people insist on doing annual budgeting. And all the fun and overhead and fooling around that goes with that. But they believe in that still, right? So how do we help the finance people? How do we help the procurement people get better? Because all it takes is one or two of those groups throwing sand into our gears, and we got a problem, okay? And I'm not saying that doing the finance stuff and the procurement stuff is fun, but it needs to be done. We need to help those people, and they're good, decent people doing the best they can, but they might need help to better align themselves with modern ways of thinking. So on the finance side of things, for example, there's a wonderful body of knowledge called Beyond Budgeting, which has been out for 15, 20 years now. Phenomenally good stuff, if you're aware of it, and if you're willing to try it out. So what we're aiming for here, why is this important? Well, we want to do business agilely. We want to be effective. And it's not really about being agile, it's about being more effective in the marketplace. So here's a few observations I would like to make. First of all, every business is a software business. Software is at the heart of every organization these days. And you need to accept that. I'm working with a firm right now that really doesn't get it. They still think that their primary business is selling atoms. And meanwhile, if they don't get their act together, moving bits back and forth, they're in serious trouble. We have got to get good at software development. We've got to get good at this IT stuff. And if we're not effective at it, somebody else will come along and eat our lunch. Years ago, I would work with organizations, and my favorite question was, what would happen to you if Microsoft decided to enter your market space? This is like the mid-90s, right? When Microsoft was a threat. So, and I guess they still are. But what would happen to you if Microsoft was to jump into the market space? And it'd be like a horror. Oh, we'd be screwed. Right? We'd be out of business in a year or two. They'd eat our lunch. Now I ask the question, what would happen to you if Amazon or Google or eBay was to decide to jump into your market space? How long do you think you could survive competing against Amazon? And you get the look of horror. Oh, I don't think we could compete against Amazon. They have drones, and they can drop packages on us or something. Right? Yeah, it's fair enough, right? Because they've got their act together on software. So every business is a software business, which means the implication of that is our business folks need to stop treating IT like a black box. They need to understand the implications of this software stuff. The software folks, of course, also need to understand the implications of the business that they're in. So if you're working in a financial institution, you should have a background in finance. I don't think it's unreasonable to expect the techie people to understand some of the fundamental basics of what they're actually implementing and be able to speak intelligently with the finance folks. Every industry is being disrupted, without a doubt. And sometimes from within. but often from without. So I do a lot of work in the my company does a lot of work in the financial industry, and one of the questions I ask, that I love to ask executives, is what keeps you up at night? What organizations are you scared of? And it's been over 2 years since I've had an executive at a bank or an insurance company tell me that they were scared of another bank. Nobody's afraid of the banks. They should be, but they're not. They're all afraid of Apple or eBay or Amazon. They're all desperately afraid of all these companies playing around with fintech right now. And rightfully so. I think they should be as well. But they're not afraid, they don't feel that their primary competitors are the traditional competitors from 5 years ago. Very, very interesting. Because these executives, they're smart people, right? They know what's going on. And they're all worried about this disruption, these other organizations that they may or may not be able to detect. And they're also, and they all label, Apple, we're all afraid of Apple, we're all afraid of Google and that. But they're almost, all of them are also saying, I'm even more afraid of the companies I don't know about. Because they're afraid of getting killed by somebody coming out from behind them and coming in and eating their lunch in whatever space that they think they're in. And these agile firms are dominating the industry. So all these, Josh was talking about a couple of companies that were doing some pretty cool things. But when you start talking about, pick any industry where there's a dominant firm, they're always lean, they're always agile, always. That is a very easy thing to observe. And sometimes, it's a little bit easier, and the Amazons are like, so what, a question asked, why does Amazon dominate? Are they special? Is there something in the water? Do the e-commerce gods, do they favor Amazon? And, they've got Apollo on their side. Like, what's going on there? Is that it? Or is Amazon hyper-competitive? Did they decide to get their act together? Did they decide to get ahead? Did they decide to be incredibly good at technology and to be fast and high quality? That's what they decided. And they do the hard work that it takes. And they constantly improve, and they constantly choose to get better. And all it takes is one, maybe two organizations in your space, whatever your space happens to be, to decide to do that and to get ahead. And then suddenly, just as we saw with Amazon, like if anybody remembers back 15, 20 years ago, late 90s, when all this e-commerce stuff was like the wild, wild west in Silicon Valley, there was like dozens of Amazon-ish type companies. And Amazon crushed them all. Anybody remember eToys? Yeah, a couple people, yeah. It's, they were an awesome company. They got crushed by Amazon, but, they locked up the toy, toys, ordering toys online market. They had that wrapped up for a good year or two. And Amazon came along and ate their lunch. Anybody remember Toys R Us? Yeah, well, yeah, there's still a few of them. But, they're been disrupted very clearly. Been disrupted by or Sears. We all remember Sears. They're in the process of wrapping up now, but they got disrupted. So very interesting space to be in, and it's these agile firms that are eating everybody's lunch right now. So what's Discipline Agile about? So very quickly, I want to walk through some of the principles behind Discipline Agile. We want to delight our customers. It's not enough to satisfy your customers to keep them happy. They've got to be delighted, because if your customers aren't delighted with what you're offering, somebody else will come along and delight them in another way, and suddenly they disappear and they're somebody else's customer, and you've got a very serious problem. So we need to up our game on our, the way we design things and the way we interact with our customers. We want to be awesome. Josh was talking about this earlier today. This is, we want awesome people working in awesome teams for an awesome company. We've got to do whatever it takes to be as good as we possibly can, and that's what's going to help us take care of our customers. We want to be pragmatic. This is not just about being agile, it's about improving and about getting better and about learning, about experimenting and figuring out what we can do to get better in the space that we're in. Okay? And sometimes that means we're doing some reasonably traditional stuff, because maybe that is the best technique right now for us in the situation we find ourselves in, and that's okay. So this agile purism stuff, be very, very aware of it. So if you get in conversations around Scrum Bud or Safe Bud or X But, be very, very careful about that. That's a purist conversation that is probably not going to help you out. Context counts. It is phenomenally easy to observe. Everybody, just look around. Everybody is different. You all work for different companies. Anybody here working in the banking space, in the financial space in Toronto right now? There's probably a few of you, right? Are all the banks the same? Is TD the same as CIBC and the same as RBC? No, of course not. But they're banks. In Toronto, headquartered in downtown Toronto, all these big banks, surely they must be the same. They're all in the same space with the same customers. They got branches. One company's green, the other's blue. But other than that, they clearly must be the same. They're just banks. It's, bank accounts. So sure, they must be the same, right? Fairly clearly, they're not. We know this. We inherently know this. So every company is unique. Every company is different. They've got their own, their own cultures. And anybody who's worked in multiple banks, they know every different bank has got their own unique culture. Even though apparently they're all doing the same thing from the point of view of an outsider. I've worked for many of them, so I know. And it's interesting. You can tell as soon as somebody says, "Oh, I work for X," one of the big. Oh, okay. You know exactly what issues they're dealing with, because anybody working in the banking industry know the culture of the other banks they're not currently working at this year. So, anyways, yeah, you know it. So, having said that, so everybody's in a different situation. So, choice is good. Choose the techniques. Choose the strategies that make the most sense for you in the situation that you face. So in Agile, we like to say teams should own their own process. That's a wonderful idea. But in order to own your own process, you sort of got to know what's for sale, don't you? Right? So, I do most of the shopping in my household. Every so often, my wife will say, "Get me flour." She bakes, right? "Get me flour." And if anybody who bakes knows, that is not what you want to see on a shopping list. Because when you go to the flour section, there's like 15 different types of flour. It's like 7 or 8 different brands, 4 or 5 different techniques within 4 or 5 different types of flour within each brand. And there's obviously trade-offs because the red, white flour is definitely different than this flour over here, right? If you're a baker, you know these things. But if you're the schmucko husband and all you've been told is, "Oh, get flour," you're really out of luck, right? So "Honey, what did you mean?" "Oh, well, I would like the one with the brown label that..." "Oh, honey, tell me what you actually want," right? But anyways, it's hard. So if you don't know what's for sale, if you don't understand the trade-offs, if you don't understand the nuances of all these different types of flour, guess what's going to happen if you're the husband? You're going to buy the wrong flour. Right? It's not going to work out well. So you got to know what you're doing. Okay? You got to understand the trade-offs of the choices that you're making. We want to optimize flow. We want to look at the bigger picture. We got to optimize the entire flow throughout the overall system, not just the little thing that we're doing. I think this is the fundamental challenge in the IT world right now. IT is complex. Organizations are complex. And when we allow the data folks to go off and figure out how we're going to do data, and you allow the enterprise architecture folks to go off, and here's how we're going to do enterprise architecture, and you allow the operations folks, here's how we're going to go off and do operations, they might come up with some really reasonably good ways of working, but it won't fit together. And the operations people will be doing things that slow everybody else down. The data folks will be doing things that are great for them, but will slow everybody else down. We need to look at the entire picture. We need to work together, and the big picture is complex. And you got to know what you're doing. You got to understand the trade-offs and the implications and how everything affects each other. DevOps is all about this, right? How do we get the operations and the development folks working together more effectively in a streamlined manner? Wonderful, wonderful vision, but there's far more to it than DevOps, of course. But at least we're moving in the right direction on that. And then finally, we need to be enterprise aware. We need to understand that my team is only one of many teams in the organization. And when I do something that's convenient for my team, that's great for us, but it might be a very bad decision for the overall organization. So when my team decides, "Oh, we're going to create yet another customer database, because that's the simplest thing to do, and it's the easiest thing possible for us," no, thanks. You just increased the technical debt in your organization. You just screwed over the data guys completely. You've just screwed over your business people because now they have yet another place to update customer information. So you've actually done significant damage. Convenient for you, wasn't that wonderful? But you've done significant damage to the overall organization. Are you even aware of that? That's an interesting question to ask. And because the developers usually aren't. They usually aren't because they don't have a background in that, because they're not looking at the bigger picture. Because that's not what they've been trained in. That's not what they've been rewarded for over the years. So helping people look at the bigger picture can be a bit of a challenge. So how does this disciplined agile delivery stuff work? What does the engine look like? So a couple things. So first of all, I'm a firm believer in choice is good. When I go into organizations, I choose to observe what's actually going on. Not what the gurus are telling us, not the fantasy world stuff that we would like to be doing if all the planets were aligned, but what is actually happening now on the ground. And when you choose to observe things, it's pretty darn easy to observe that different teams are working in different ways. So in any organization now, so I could walk into a company, I could go downtown right now, walk into a company, and they will swear up and down they're doing Scrum. And I'll walk in, and I'll see a team sort of doing Scrum, couple cubes over, they'll be sort of doing Kanban, couple cubes over, here's another sort of Scrumish team that's doing something very different than the Scrumish team over here. Here's a team doing some sort of lean startup thing and so on. Here's a team that's been together for a couple years. They've actually been allowed to be successful, and now they're doing some sort of continuous delivery, modern, agile-ish type of a thing. Good for them. So even though they're a Scrum company, all these teams are doing something different, and rightfully so. So in Discipline Agile, we support multiple life cycles. So we support a lean, Kanban-based life cycle because some teams it makes sense to do lean, Kanban-ish type things. So let's support that. Some teams do Scrum. Scrum's a great starting point. So some teams are doing Scrum, so let's support that. Some teams, when that lean team stays together for a while, they eventually start to do continuous delivery. They learn, they get better, they automate things. They start doing some sort of lean continuous delivery thing. We've seen some Scrum-ish agile teams evolve into some more of a lean continuous delivery thing, or some sort of agile continuous delivery thing. Not quite pure modern agile type stuff, but definitely getting there. Maybe they're releasing to production once a week type of thing. It's still sort of doing Scrum, but not really doing continuous delivery yet. Good for them. We see some teams doing lean startup type stuff, what we call exploratory, and good for them. Different teams, different situations, do different things. So you need to be able to support multiple life cycles. Now the first thing is, so as soon as I show these sorts of slides to management, they freak out. It's, what do you mean all these teams are going to be doing something different? Yeah, but we have to govern. Oh no, right? So keep that in mind. So yes, we want to allow different teams to do the right thing in the situation they find themselves in, but we still need to govern them. We still need to support them. We still need to help them. Okay, so keep that in mind when we start talking about some of the other things. What we'll also see is even if you don't believe in this vision, let's say I'm a crazy whack job, you don't believe in this at all, this is not what you want to hear, you're a CMMI shop and you know that repeatable processes are the way to go because this is what's been rammed down your throat for decades. Let's assume that that's your world. Good for you. But now you're going agile. And what do agilists do? They reflect, they improve, they learn, they experiment, they get better. So I could start at any one of those points, and no matter where I start, if I allow my team to actually be agile and actually learn and actually get better, which I would hope as senior management you would want to have happen, that, why wouldn't you want your teams to improve? When you allow them to improve, you start seeing patterns like this, where yes, they started off with agile, some sort of agile Scrumish type of a thing, and they got better and they evolved into some sort of Kanban-ish thing, or they evolved into some sort of continuous delivery type of a thing, and so on. So no matter where they start, they're going to get better over time, because this is what it's all about. This is what we hope these teams to be doing. So even if you could wave your magic wand and have all your teams start with the official one process of doing things, after a few months, if they're actually doing it, everybody will be doing something different anyways. So you'd better go in eyes wide open on that one, because that will happen to you. So what's the implication of that? It tells you that the governance people, senior management, need to be flexible. So instead of having these waterfall-ish, quality gate, documentation-based, let's inflict common templates on everybody and police all that and get the process Nazis hunting everybody down if they're not filling out the documents right, let's instead have lightweight, risk-based milestones that we can bring to any type of life cycle. So we can have the same risk-based life cycle, but not have it documentation-based, not have it artifact-based, but have it based on, are you paying down these common risks? And if you're paying down the risk in some way, okay, great. So this is looking at it from a project point of view. I should have pointed this out. The Agile and the Lean life cycles tend to be project-based. We've got this beginning and a start, because we still haven't dealt with the project management issue. But when we keep our teams together, When we allow them to be stable, we start finding the project, we start getting away from the project mindset, then suddenly the phases start to disappear. And you end up, and this is how you evolve into a continuous delivery thing. You allow your teams to stay together, and then suddenly this phased-based, sprint zero, inception, whatever you want to call that stuff, starts to disappear by itself. This transition deployment stuff starts to turn into an activity because we automate the living heck out of our tests and out of our deployment scripts and stuff like that. So we end up with these continuous delivery type life cycles when we learn and we improve and all that good sort of stuff. So anyways, but we also know that this is a good start at a high-level life cycle. We also know it's not about projects, for many reasons, but we know long before a project kicked off, we must have had some sort of conceptualization, portfolio, and product management type stuff. Somebody must have identified the need for this product or project that we're working on. We do a bunch of work, and maybe we rinse and repeat and go to the next release, but every so often we release into production where we operate and support this thing, and eventually, at some point in the future, we have to retire this system. It could be decades or millennia from now, but eventually we got to take it out and shoot it and replace it with something else, usually, right? So we end up with this fuller life cycle. So it's interesting that the delivery portion of this life cycle is this inception, construction, transition stuff, and yes, inception and transition shrink and disappear eventually if you keep your teams together. And DevOps is more about construction, transition, production type stuff. Fair enough, right? So still not the full picture, by the way, for those of you who are still just focused on DevOps. So let's look at the bigger picture. Another interesting thing, the vast majority, I think something like 80 to 85% of Agile teams are in a situation where they're working on the new release of an existing solution. So they're getting enhanced requests and defect reports coming in for production. So fine, fair enough, that's new requirements, prioritize them, get to it when you get to it. So let's build that right into the life cycle. Let's take the mystery out of how things work. We shouldn't be having these, like 15, 20 years later, we shouldn't still be having basic discussions like, well, what happens when, when defects occur in production? How should I handle that? Anybody that's on any of the mailing lists or any of the discussion forums know these conversations are still occurring on a daily basis. We're not learning, folks. We are not learning as an industry if we're still having inane conversations like that. And some of it is because of the process, because of the methods. They don't want to deal with observable reality. We talk about empiricism. We generally don't work in an empirical manner in this industry because as soon as you start being empirical from a process wonk point of view, you start getting a really nasty picture. If you start observing what's really going on, and it becomes really hard to run the various certification schemes when you do stuff like that. Okay, so we got to look at the big picture. I'm a firm believer in dealing with reality. We often hear about, you'll hear rhetoric around shifting left, so we're shifting testing left in the life cycle. Awesome ideas. We're also shifting modeling and planning and thinking right in the life cycle. And the idea, and it's really continuous. It's not about shift left, shift right. It's about continuous. We're continuously planning, we're continuously thinking, we're continuously testing, we're continuously developing. That's the real vision. This is where all the continuous delivery stuff gets into play. Now, one of the issues that's interesting from a process point of view is it depends, right? Or context counts. Every team is in a different situation. Every team works differently. Phenomenally easy to observe. So what do you do, right? So here's where a lot of the coaches tend to fall down. So they assume that because, well, every team does things differently, we got to reinvent the wheel. We got to start from scratch every time, which is great if you're being paid, if you're a coach being paid by the hour, which is my business, so don't get me wrong. It's not so great if you're the person paying the coach by the hour, because they're reinventing the freaking wheel. Because thousands, tens of thousands of organizations have whatever problem you think you're dealing with right now, I can pretty safely say thousands of organizations have dealt with it at some point in the past. You do not have to reinvent that wheel. You don't. You just don't. Because the reality is that even though every team works differently, we're still addressing the same basic goals. We're still addressing the same basic realities. So when we first initiate a team, we got to do basic things like put the team together. There's different ways we can do that, but we got to put the team together. We should do some initial planning. We should do some initial scoping, some initial architecture work. Ooh, there's a swear word for you. We do some initial upfront modeling. That's what the grown-ups do, by the way. A little over 90% of Agile teams do some upfront planning, upfront modeling. If you choose to work empirically and observe those things, it's very phenomenally easy to observe. And I've got wonderful industry data on that if you don't believe me. Because the thing is, on the vast majority of situations, when you first put a team together, the executives, being the crazy people that they are going to ask weird questions like, well, what are you going to do? How much is it going to cost? How long is it going to take? How are you going to do it? And if you don't have semi-coherent answers, you don't get funding. Nobody's going to start throwing money at you if you don't know what you're doing. Right? Fair enough. So, because we're being governed. So we've got to do a little bit of this upfront initial work, but we want to keep this as streamlined as possible. We don't want to spend weeks or months doing this. We want to spend days, maybe a week or so doing this. Keep it as lightweight and streamlined as possible, which means you're going to have to, claw back on some of your modelers and managers. During construction, we're going to do basic things like put the solution together, verify the solution. We're going to improve quality as we go, I would hope. We're going to learn and improve as we go. During transition or deployment, we're going to get ready to deploy, and then we're going to deploy. Hopefully all that's automated. If it's not, then someone's manual. Is what it is, and we opportunity to get better in that case. Throughout all of this, we should be doing things like investing in our team, growing our team members. We should be governing effectively. We should be improving and learning as we go. Many, many other things, and there's all different ways we can do that. Okay, so at a very high level, you get this commonality. Now it's a bit complex. There's complexity there. But whenever I get at, whenever somebody dings me on, well, look how complex it is. Oh my God, this is not what I'm hearing in my 2-day certification course. Okay, well, what would you remove? What would you remove? You don't want to do risk management? Okay, take that away. Good luck. You don't want to do governance? Probably not up to you. You are going to get governed. Can't get rid of it. So anyway, so this is the thing. There's inherent complexity in what we do in this industry. It is what it is. We need to embrace that, keep it as simple as we possibly can, but if we start ignoring some of these things, bad things will start to happen to you. So at a high level, we get this, but this isn't the greatest advice. This is not exactly detailed advice. So how do we drive down? Because not only does context count, but choice is good. So we walk you through, so Discipline Agile is really what's called a process decision framework. We help make you aware of these process-oriented decisions that you're making and make you aware of some of the options that you've got and the trade-offs that you're making. So in this case, our point is there's multiple ways that we can secure funding early in this effort. When we're securing funding, we should probably think through how are we going to fund it. Is this a fixed price gig? Is it time materials? Is it cost plus? There's different ways we can do that. How do we go, what are we actually funding? Are we funding a stable team? Are we funding a project effort? Are we funding the overall, the entire business value stream? And then how do we access the funds? Is this formal process where we sacrifice a chicken and look at the entrails and hope for the best? Is it we just go and ask for some money, somewhere in between? Different ways you can do that. So inherently, we need to think through these decisions, right? And so our point is do the best you can in the situation you got. Know that you've got choices, and pick the strategies that are best for you in the situation that you face. Now, in this case, on all these lists, we see arrows. Now, that's not always the case. We'll see some. Actually, let's just go to another example. So sometimes we see arrows, sometimes we don't. Whenever we see an arrow, that's an indication that the strategies towards the top of the list are generally more effective than the strategies towards the bottom of the list. So it's sort of a maturity model, not quite. But the idea is that, yes, so today you might be doing, in this case, this is how do we address changing stakeholder needs. So today we might be doing a Scrum product backlog type of an approach, but there's other better approaches. So let's make you aware of that. And maybe you can start working your way up the food chain, start making improvements, start experimenting with different ways that you can manage your requirements work or manage your work in general that might be better than a product backlog. Know that you've got choices. Know that in behind all of these strategies, there's trade-offs. There's no such thing as a best practice. So if you want to make good choices, you should understand the trade-offs that you're making and then choose accordingly. So choose intelligently. So yes, there's some complexity here. Yes, but it's inherent complexity in what we do. Let's start making better choices. Let's get out of the trap, this prescription trap that many of our teams are currently in. Let's understand there's better ways of working. Now, we're not saying that we've identified all possible techniques in the known universe, but we are saying you got a pretty good set of choices here. At least know that there's other ways of doing things, and think for yourselves. Choose what's best for you, and experiment with other techniques as well and see what happens in your situation. Here's another example of where some of our coding and design practices lie, producing a potentially consumable solution. So anyways, a bunch of technical techniques as well, because we address all aspects of the work, not just the fun meetings we like to have. Now, an important thing I want to leave you with before we move on is scaling. So when we talk about scaling in the Discipline Agile world, it's not just about large teams, it's not just about programs, it's about what issues do we face. Because once again, context counts. Do the right thing in the situation that you face. So a team of 5 people will work differently than a team of 50 than a team of 500. A team in a regulatory environment will work, in a financial regulatory environment, will work differently than in a non-regulatory environment, and certainly differently than in a life-critical regulatory environment. A team where we're outsourcing some of the work will work differently than when we have a team that is working for a single division of the same company. A team facing a simple problem will work differently than a team facing a very complex problem, and so on. So wherever you are, wherever your team is on these various vertices, you will make different choices. So when your team is deciding on how we're going to work, a large team will make a different set of choices than a small team. A team in a regulatory space will make a different set of choices here than a team in a non-regulatory space. Right? Different teams, different situations make different choices. And of course, the skill of people involved will also drive some of this as well. Now, what's interesting, when I show diagrams like this to senior management and organizations, the only response that I've ever gotten is, oh my God, we have all of this. Yes, you do. But my team will have a different set of scaling factors than your team, because we're different people facing a different set of situation. And that's okay. So my team will make, even though we're working for the same company, we will make different choices if we want to have a process and we want to have organization structure for our team that works for us. So fair enough. So context counts, having choices, good thing, but it also puts the onus on us. We got to know what we're doing. Got to be competent. Got to have some experience. Right? It's not just some easy follow the cookbook and you can get your job done type thing. Right? We really got to know what we're doing. So, what does this race car look like? So we talked probably spent a little too much time on our engines. What does our race car look like? So I'm sure you've all seen this, and if you've been to any DevOps talks today, I'm sure everybody's shown you some sort of their version of the figure 8 infinite loop thing. All good stuff. So this is the fairly straightforward stuff, but it's missing a few important things. So if you start diving down the details of DevOps, you'll start seeing that can only continuous delivery teams do DevOps? Is it not possible for a Scrum team to do DevOps? Well, and the answer is yes. Scrum teams could in fact do DevOps. It's not, and yes, it would be better if it was only continuous delivery teams, but be that as it may. So different teams throwing different life cycles can still be DevOps or DevOps-ish. What about security? What about the business? Where's the business in all of this? Right? Should we not be sort of implied, but the business folks need to also be, we know this, right? We need to help the business change their behaviors to leverage these DevOps efforts. It's no good releasing stuff into production several times a day if the business isn't interested in that. If they can't handle that or choose not to handle that, might be a better way of looking at it. What about the data folks? I run into organization after organization after organization after organization where the data management stuff is a disaster. It's great that we've got these application programmers. We can release into production several times a day. That's awesome. Oh, but you want to add a column to a database? That's 6 weeks. 6 weeks of effort to do 5 minutes worth of work. How many people work in an organization where it's roughly that? A week, in order a week. Yeah, all these hands are going, yeah. Only 6 weeks? Not bad. That's a serious problem. So you're not really doing DevOps, folks. You are not doing DevOps if the data folks can't also release into production like that, because that is part of the overall picture. And I'm sure some of you working in companies where you got a little bit of technical debt on the data side of things. Wouldn't it be nice if we fixed that, right? So anyways, we got to get our act together on data stuff. And what about release management? Yeah, it's great that we're releasing stuff into production several times a day. What happens when you've got hundreds of teams releasing stuff into production several times a day, or thousands of teams. You need a little bit of coordination, and we've got customers, we got one customer with over 1,200 Discipline Agile teams in flight, and most of them are doing continuous delivery now, and there's a little bit of coordination in order to have 1,200 teams successfully deliver stuff into production on a very, very regular basis. So we got to get our act together on release management. Okay? It's not just the single team DevOps thing, but it's what happens when you get dozens or hundreds or thousands of teams doing DevOps in your organization. And there are organizations that do that. And what about support? Yes, I'm a firm believer you build it, you run it, you support it, all good sort of stuff. But if I'm on the receiving end of that, if I'm an end user and I'm using one of the many hundreds of applications in your company, where the heck do I go to for support and for help? Am I supposed to know, have a friend on hundreds of application development teams? No, of course not. I'm going to go to some sort of help desk or some sort of self-service environment first, and then find, maybe, and then, if I'm really out of luck, I have to go talk to a help desk person. But that's the sort of thing, right? So, support across multiple teams is also an issue. So anyways, the point is that if you start looking at the DevOps workflow in normal, in the enterprise, all the types of enterprises that most of us are working in, it's not quite this pretty figure eight. It's, I don't know what that figure is, but certainly not a figure eight. And that's at a high level. So it's certainly not as pretty as what we see here, because everything's got to work. We got to be optimizing the entire flow, not just the fun stuff that we're currently working on. It's fun for us. Got to optimize the entire flow here. So that's what the racing car looks like. So what does the racing car team look like? Because it's not just about DevOps. So we're starting to see more and more organizations that are taking it to the next level, and now they realize, we sort of got our act together on DevOps, but if we don't have our act together on HR, it's interesting. There's several companies here that the only reason why they're at this conference today is to hire people. They got the shingle out, desperately trying to hire people, right? They're trying to attack good agile people. They've somehow they figured out, oh yeah, we need to have good people in order to do this. Wow, yeah, there's a learning. So we got to get our act together on the way we manage, the way we organize our people. We've got to get our act together on governance. We got to get our act together on enterprise architecture, hopefully on reuse. We talk about reuse, very rarely do we pull it off effectively. And there's patterns, there's techniques where we can be quite effective at achieving real reuse if we choose to step up. How do we do portfolio management? How do we do product management? So there's a bunch of stuff in the IT space. So that's what the racing car and team looks like at a very, very high level, of course. And of course, in behind all this is all the goal diagram stuff and more detailed workflows and stuff like this. Notice how there's no starting point, no ending point, all just this engine. So organizations are what's called complex adaptive systems. So if these are teams, they might not be teams, but if they're teams, then you can view it as each of these teams, they're doing their own thing, they're learning, they're improving, they're changing as they go, and because they interact with each other, they have an effect on each other. So the process is constantly evolving, the organization structure is constantly evolving, the people doing the work are constantly evolving. So we end up with this unpredictable situation. This is, in Cynefin, they would call this a complex environment. Well, in this case, a complex adaptive system. So it's this unpredictable. All you can do is experiment. You can probe and sense, and you try something and see what happens. Basically, you can't predict up front what a change will actually do. You can just make the change and see what happens, hope for the best, and if it's a good idea, spread the change as widely as you can. So much different, and this is the norm. This is the reality that we face in enterprise, and this is a complex issue. It is what it is, right? And once again, yes, it's complex, but what would you take away? A rhetorical question. I'll let you think about that. Recently, in the last, this year, we expanded the framework to now address the entire enterprise. So because we've run into so many organizations where they're sort of getting their act together in IT, they're working on getting better at DevOps, they're changing IT, but they're still being blindsided by questionable procurement practices or questionable finance practices. So we really need, we need this racing environment. We need the entire enterprise to be improving and getting better and learning. And they need help. This is what makes enterprise coaching challenging. So the entire framework, to summarize, looks like this. So when we see, now, we're not showing workflow. If we showed workflows here, it would be a disaster. So I tried it. Desperately tried to come up with this, safe-ish, diagram where everything's connected and you can see all the flows. Couldn't be, it's just a complete dog's breakfast. Because your organization is a complex adaptive system. We're all, we've got these teams and groups of people and teams and individuals. We're all working together, hopefully working in roughly the right, same direction, and we have an effect on each other. Things are constantly changing, constantly evolving, and every organization is different, as we could choose to observe if we want to. So one idea that I want to leave you with is these prescriptive methods, where here's the magic recipe, here's the 2-day certification course or the 4-day professionalism course, where they're telling you the one way of doing things, and if you only do it this way, things are great. That might have worked, that might work for somebody, but unless you are in a situation where that method is appropriate for, it's probably not going to work out. So, and if you've got the skills and all this sort of stuff, but it's not going to work out well for you. My message is that this is hard. What we do is complex. Let's keep it as simple as we possibly can, but let's not be overly simplistic, and let's understand that in order to do this, we need to have the skills to do the job. We need to be willing to learn and work with each other and collaborate with each other. We have to expect that things will change. We have to embrace change. We have to embrace experimentation and embrace all these learning techniques and understand that we as an organization need to figure out how we're going to work together, how we're going to be successful. But that does not mean we need to stop and start from scratch. We do not have to reinvent the wheel. There are wonderful bodies of knowledge in behind all of these things, and we can leverage ideas, we can leverage experiences. We can leverage, at this conference today, there's been some great speakers, and every speaker has 20 or 30 techniques they've sort of wrapped up in a 1-hour talk. And if you start adding up the number, just today's talks, I have to think there were several hundred great ideas presented at this conference today. At least. All those great ideas have trade-offs. They have advantages, they have disadvantages. They work in some situations. They're the kiss of death in other situations. Do you know that? Do the speakers know that? Yeah, that's a harsh question, but certainly do you know that, right? So we need to find, so Discipline Agile is all about, let's surface these decisions that we're making. Let's surface these trade-offs and in a as lightweight manner as possible and help you make better decisions. Also, get you out from under the thumb of the one-trick pony consultants who only know the one way of doing things. And that might be a great one way, but that might not be the way that's best for you because you're in a different situation. And yeah, that's a complex world. Sorry about that. So just to wrap up here, we worked through 7 principles. We've got, if you're a sticker person, you like putting stickers on your laptop, we've got stickers at the booth there. But the framework is based on these principles, and it goes. All these principles go all the way through. It's one of those things where and we saw this with Modern Agile. We've seen this with other things as well. But some wonderful ideas there. We also saw there's a fair bit to the framework. It started out with Discipline Agile delivery a few years ago. We expanded to DevOps. We started addressing IT. Now we're working on the full picture. How do these enterprises work together? And that big picture that I showed a couple minutes ago with all those bubbles, all those different process blades, those process areas, these are the things that we're dealing with in enterprises. Your company is dealing with this today, and this is hard stuff. And you've got to look at this bigger picture. The bigger picture is ugly, but you've got to look at this bigger picture, because if you let these different, I hate build slides. If you let these different groups, if there's a group in behind each one of these, and you're trying to do the right processes and all sorts of stuff, they will come up with great ways of working, but they're not going to fit together. And this, I think, is the fundamental challenge that we've seen in IT over the last several decades, is that we tried to divide and conquer, because there's a body of knowledge. Like, there's ITIL in behind operations and support. There's the DAMA body of knowledge in behind data management. There's the TOGAF and DODAF and Zockman and several others in behind enterprise architecture. They haven't even settled on a single body of knowledge yet. Right? And there's the Agile canon. There's the Lean canon in behind some of the software development stuff. There's all these different bodies of knowledge or books of knowledge, whatever you want to call them. And you know what? And they're great, a bunch of great ideas and all, a bunch of questionable ideas in all of them too, but they don't fit together. They're all at the center of the universe, amazingly. They all have this basic message that if everybody just does it the way we want to do it, and if we're allowed to run this show, everything will be fine. Certainly that's the Agile message, when you step back and be honest about it. And it's certainly the PMI message, it's certainly the Zockman message, it's certainly the DAMA message, and so on. Well, not everybody can be the center of the universe. Nobody's the center of the universe in this picture. We've got to work together. And we've got to take the best ideas and best techniques that make sense for us in the situation that we face and put them together and be prepared to change over time. So we're dealing with moving targets here. So anyway, so thank you very much. I got a few minutes for questions, amazingly. Any questions or any answers? Even better yet, answers are great. Wave your hand. Everybody's overwhelmed. Question, that gentleman there. I assume you're a gentleman. You are, okay. Is this slide deck available? I'll make it available, yeah. The conference people haven't badgered me for it yet, amazingly. But yeah, so I'll make it. In worst case, it'll be on SlideShare. But I assume the conference folks have got a scheme for sharing decks. So the answer is yes. An older version of this deck is on SlideShare right now, actually. That gentleman there.
You mentioned that every company at its core should be software driven. Do you find that there's some industries that are particularly more difficult to work with than others?
Okay, so sorry about the people on the camera. Yeah, so the question is, are there any industries more difficult to work with others than to get them to change and improve? No, I don't find that. I find that having worked in multiple industries, yeah, some companies have cultures, so one bank will be very difficult to work with, another bank will be very easy to work with. So I don't see it industry-wide. I do see, I'm not going to go back to that slide, but I do see areas. So for example, data management tends to be a little harder to work with than other areas simply because their body of knowledge is very not agile and still 1970s based for the most part. I do find that. I find the governance effort tends to be a bit dysfunctional as well, also because 1970s thinking, be things like that. But yeah, I couldn't point to a single industry and say, yeah, that industry is completely utterly messed up. Yeah, I could definitely point to certain companies in each industry, and that are either end of the spectrum, or anywhere in between. That gentleman.
Can we go back to the slide with the arrows?
Oh man, you're evil. This arrow slide? Okay, yeah. So workflow. Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant.
So for the people on the camera, he's telling me how awesome this diagram is. Thank you. It's a brilliant diagram.
How did you do it? What was your train of thought?
All observational, and it's evolved over time. Rod Bray there has been actively involved in it over a few years, and it's just diagrams evolved, but we're constantly tweaking it. But it's all based on what we observe in customers and stuff like that. And it's a very high-level diagram. Like, you can drill, and we do drill down, but you can drill down into this in more detail. For anybody who's a process modeling wonk, this is a level 1 data flow diagram from, if you're a wonk. But yeah, you can get down to more levels of detail. Hatley there.
What I like about, I see product management and business very close together. I don't know, do you see that as in a lot of big organizations, or is product manager way the heck over, in the technical?
It depends. I would hope that because if you look at product management, the question was, do you see product management and business working together closely? The answer is they darn well should be, because product management is focusing on a lot of things. They drive IT effort, but they also are responsible for marketing and sales and going into the marketplace, observing the market and trying to figure out what the heck is going on, long-term planning, long-term visioning. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the product management space, not just the IT-ish stuff that we like to focus on. Certainly it's all important, but it's mostly businessy stuff when it gets down to it. Not totally, but mostly. And that gentleman there.
What ways to get out of it? How do you do this?
Yeah, so the question is, basically, so when you're a lean, agile organization and you're working with a not so lean, not so agile organization, maybe you got the bank's procurement people are trying to procure a contract with you. type of scenario. Yeah, it happens all the time. And so the challenge is look at it from the bank point of view. The bank, if they want agile, if they want to be more agile, then they need to realize they need to, if they want an agile team, they want, they're outsourcing something to you, then they need to procure an agile team in an agile manner in order to get what they want. If they throw, if they ask for agile, but they have this traditional goofy process that is pretty much guarantees that they're not going to get agile, then you got a problem. So as the outsourcer company, as the service provider, you need to be prepared. Now this is always dicey because you got to worry about losing the contract, but you've got to be prepared to educate the customer, the business folks in the customer end, to say, if you want this, this is the way you need to behave. And we're happy to help you work this way. But if you're not willing to work this way, you will not get what you're asking for, right? And then, it depends. Sometimes the companies are willing to change their behavior. Sometimes they're not. And if they're not, then they procure whatever they procure, and it is what it is. If they're willing to change, and often they are. Like I get in these conversations all the time, and I have about a 1/3 success rate in converting companies over to working, the procurement folks working more agile, because often the vendors don't push back because they're afraid of losing the business. Anyways, I've been told to stop. The nice lady in the back there. There should be feedback cards. Please fill them out on the way out. And on the way out, we've got crates of books. So if you go through those doors only, because that's where the books are, they will hand you books on the way out. And better yet, if you can also hand in feedback cards, the folks will appreciate that. Thank you very much. Have a great conference. There's going to be an awesome panel in about 10 minutes.